At the edge of the Orion Arm, where trade routes converge and war fleets patrolled, the fortress at the gate stood as the symbol of the Galactic Coalition's authority. It was not simply a station, but a sprawling citadel, a blend of alloy, living architecture, and decades of accumulated arrogance, commanded by a circle of alien generals, each decorated with victories and boasting of campaigns where entire species have been humbled. The gate was a choke point no ship was meant to cross without permission. On that cycle, the generals gathered in the war chamber, entertained by reports of new conquests. They traded insults about weak species that had folded under minimal pressure. To them, humanity was barely worth mentioning, a race of predators trapped on a backwater death world, technologically behind, reckless, and expendable. A handful of reports of human skirmishes were dismissed as exaggerated. One general sneered that humans were little more than dangerous animals wrapped in fragile skin. Another added that their tendency to fight among themselves meant they could never threaten the order of the galaxy. They drank, laughed, and congratulated themselves on the stability of their dominion. A transmission cut through the revelry. A vessel was approaching the gate. The sensor feeds displayed a human ship, small, scarred from travel, and unarmed by any meaningful standard. The chamber filled with laughter. To them, it looked like a relic patched together from scrap, barely able to sustain its own atmosphere. "It looks like they're myths of sailing ships," one general mocked. Another suggested broadcasting the feed to the entire fortress, so the soldiers could enjoy the spectacle. Orders were given to open observation channels, and soon thousands of eyes across the fortress turned to the lonely speck approaching their impenetrable gate. The ship docked with an almost insulting slowness, as though it had no concern for the war machine surrounding it. A single figure stepped from the vessel. She was human, female by the biological scans. She wore no armor, carried no visible weapons, and walked with deliberate calm that grated against the general's expectations. The chamber filled with mocking commentary. Some generals questioned if this was some kind of plea for surrender, a pathetic envoy sent by a desperate species. Others claimed it was a display of human stupidity, sending an unarmed woman to negotiate with warlords. The soldiers in the observation decks laughed openly, jeering at the idea that such a fragile being could stand at their gate. But beneath the mockery, unease stirred in the lower ranks. It was subtle, an instinct present to them not by training but by something older. The woman's eyes were steady, her expression unreadable. She stood as if she were not surrounded by enemies, but had chosen the place, the time, and the outcome. The generals dismissed the silence as defiance, too arrogant to see the warning in it. Protocol demanded a biometric scan of all arrivals. The order was given casually, as if to further humiliate her. The fortress scanners activated, beams washing across her body, collecting every detail. Genetic markers, neural patterns, historical traces. The results loaded into the system, expected to show nothing of note. Instead, alarms blared. The chamber filled with flashing crimson. The words appeared not in the standard script of the fortress, but in a language old and rarely seen. Translation protocols engaged, and the generals read the warning aloud with disbelief. "Baba Yaga, do not engage." The laughter stopped. The room grew still, heavy with confusion. One general slammed a fist against the console, demanding answers. Another accused the scanners of malfunction. Yet the system repeated itself over and over. "Baba Yaga, do not engage." The soldiers watching the feed shifted uneasily. They whispered in hushed tones, old stories passed in barracks and forbidden archives, tales of humans who could not be explained by logic or probability. Whispered names from conflicts that had been buried. The generals scoffed at the reaction of their troops. They reminded them that the fortress was invincible, that no single being could defy their authority. They dismissed the warning as human trickery, a relic of exaggerated records. To admit fear would be to undermine everything they had built. So they mocked louder, laughing in the face of the scarlet words blazing across every display. The woman did not respond. She did not flinch as the alarm sounded. She did not protest when the generals hurled insults. She only stood, silent and unshaken, her eyes fixed on them as though measuring, weighing, and already knowing the outcome. The generals grew irritated by her refusal to react. They demanded she speak, demanded she kneel, demanded she explain herself. Still she remained silent, and that silence became heavier than any weapon. One general ordered the AI to purge the alert. The system refused. The classification was locked at the highest level, inaccessible even to the fortress command. The generals shouted, furious that a name could override their authority. The soldiers below shifted restlessly. Some recognized the name from forbidden fragments, legends told in whispers. The human spirit given form, the unkillable, the relentless, the shadow that returned from every mission no matter the odds. Baba Yaga, not a title chosen by humans themselves, but a label forced upon them by alien record keepers who had survived encounters and wished never to see one again. The generals dismissed it as coward superstition. They leaned on their arrogance, insisting that the coalition's strength was unshakable. They compared the woman to mythological phantoms, irrelevant to modern warfare. They declared her presence at the gate nothing more than human desperation dressed in theatrics. They promised their troops that this was no nightmare, only a weak creature waiting to be reminded of her place. Yet even as they spoke, their voices rang hollow. The fortress was built on fear and order, and fear was slipping from their control. The soldiers who had once laughed at the arrival now avoided her gaze on the feeds. The air in the war chamber grew thick with something unspoken. Generals barked louder, but the silence of the human woman drowned them out. She stood at the threshold of their power, surrounded by fleets, weapons, and arrogance. She carried no weapons, made no threats, and yet the fortress felt less secure than it ever had. The warning remained, crimson and undeniable: do not engage. The generals, unwilling to bend, convinced themselves the silence meant submission. They believed their own laughter could erase the weight of the name. But in the hearts of their soldiers, unease deepened into fear. The cycle ended with the generals still mocking, still laughing at their own invincibility, blind to the storm they had invited into their fortress. The woman did not move, did not speak, did not break the stillness. She only waited, calm as death itself, while the fortress pretended that the red warning meant nothing. And though the generals believed they had faced a fragile envoy, the galaxy would one day mark this moment as the instant the gate began to crumble, not from assault or siege, but from the presence of a single human whose name alone was enough to terrify history.
The generals demanded answers, their pride wounded by the crimson warning that refused to vanish. They ordered the Fortress Intelligence Corps to unseal whatever classification had triggered the alert. The AI hesitated, something it had never done before under their commands, then slowly pulled fragments from archives so deeply buried that even high-ranking officers had never known they existed. The fragments were fractured records, half-erased war reports, survivor testimonies, and encrypted data from conflicts officially erased from the annals of galactic history. What they revealed was not a human fleet, not an empire, not an organized campaign, but a single operative whose codename repeated across centuries: Baba Yaga. At first, the generals scoffed. The record spoke of impossible feats, lone infiltrations that brought down fleets, assassinations that altered the outcomes of wars, sabotage campaigns that toppled empires from within. They accused the data of exaggeration, propaganda from enemies too ashamed to admit defeat. But the AI countered each dismissal with corroborating evidence, multiple species reporting the same figure across centuries. It showed imagery of battlefields where weapons had been turned against their masters, where supply lines collapsed without a shot fired, where leaders were found dead in sealed chambers with no sign of entry. Each incident was classified under the same designation: do not engage. Baba Yaga. The soldiers who heard the stories grew pale. Some recognized details from legends told by veterans who had survived encounters with humans long before official contact. Those who had laughed at the woman's arrival now stood rigid, their earlier mockery curdled into dread. For if even half of what the records showed was true, then the figure standing silently in their fortress was no envoy. She was a weapon that had already claimed more victories than their entire coalition. The generals, unwilling to admit fear, hardened their arrogance. They ordered her detained, confident that numbers would prevail. A squad of heavily armed soldiers moved to restrain her, their armor gleaming, weapons charged. She did not resist. She allowed them to approach. But as they reached for her arms, movement blurred faster than their sensors could track. In less than a breath, the squad lay disabled, their weapons scattered, their bodies intact but rendered unconscious. Not a single fatal strike. Not a wasted motion. The soldiers watching the feed fell into silence. The generals demanded explanations. How had she moved with such precision? How had she bypassed their armor? The AI responded coldly, listing human neurological adaptations, death world reflexes honed through millennia of survival, and training regimens that other species could not endure without breaking. Humans adapted to pain, to loss, to environments that shredded other organisms. Where others relied on technology, humans became their own weapons. The generals sneered at the analysis, but their voices betrayed cracks of unease. She finally spoke, her voice soft yet carrying across the chamber. She told them they had mocked humans for their fragility, yet that fragility was a mask for something far more dangerous. She told them survival was not a weakness, but a doctrine written into every cell of her species. Where others evolved to fit their worlds, humans forced worlds to yield. Where others surrendered when outnumbered, humans adapted and endured until the tide turned. She did not raise her voice, did not threaten, but each word carried the weight of history. The soldiers listening felt as if death itself was speaking through her. The generals tried to reassert control. They ordered heavier squads to surround her. Entire corridors filled with soldiers, weapons leveled. But hesitation rippled through the ranks. The crimson warning burned in their vision. Do not engage. Many lowered their weapons, unwilling to be the first to test the legend. The generals barked commands, accused their troops of cowardice, threatened punishment. Yet even as squads advanced, their movements were slow, reluctant. The woman stepped forward, unhurried, as though she were walking through empty halls. A soldier panicked and fired. The bolt hissed past her head, scorching the wall. Before anyone could react, she had stripped the weapon from his hands and dismantled it into useless pieces, placing them gently on the ground before stepping past him. No anger, no wasted effort, only efficiency. The fortress air grew heavier with every step she took. The generals began to sense that brute force would not save them. They ordered the AI to calculate her threat level in combat. The system responded with silence. Then, for the first time in the fortress's existence, the AI displayed not numbers or percentages, but a single directive: do not engage. When pressed for elaboration, it explained that every recorded attempt to neutralize her or others bearing her designation had ended in catastrophic failure for the attackers. Fleets destroyed, leaders assassinated, infrastructure turned against itself. She was not a soldier to be fought, but a phenomenon to be avoided. The generals, desperate to retain control, turned to intimidation. They threatened Earth, threatened humanity as a whole, claiming that their fleets could scorch the homeworld to ash. For the first time, she smiled. It was not a smile of amusement, but of recognition, as if she had heard the same threat countless times before and watched it fail. She reminded them that humanity had already faced extinction more times than most species had faced war. Plagues, ice ages, volcanic winters, meteors, wars among themselves that made galactic battles look tame. Each should have ended them, and yet they endured. Every attempt to erase them only made them more dangerous. Her smile faded, and silence followed, heavier than the weight of fleets. The generals ordered her captured again, this time deploying mechanized exocets designed for siege warfare. Towering machines stomped into the corridors, surrounding her in steel and plasma firepower. Yet as they advanced, systems malfunctioned. Power conduits ruptured. Targeting arrays flickered and failed. The exocets collapsed under their own weight, as though the fortress itself betrayed them. Soldiers scrambled in confusion, shouting about sabotage. The woman walked past the wreckage without breaking stride. The truth became undeniable. She had not come to plead. She had not come to surrender. She had come to show them the futility of their arrogance. Every attempt to subdue her only fed the legend. Soldiers began abandoning posts, slipping away from their duty, unwilling to stand against the red warning that had already proven true. Some whispered that they would rather face a firing squad for desertion than stand in her path. One general slammed his fist on the console, screaming that she was only one human, that numbers would prevail. But another, quieter, admitted what the others refused to speak. One human was sometimes enough. The coalition's arrogance had blinded them to the simple truth that humanity's strength was not in numbers or fleets, but in individuals who could turn the impossible into inevitability. The gate was unraveling. Orders barked from the war chamber no longer carried weight. Soldiers who had once sworn oaths to fight to the last now abandoned their posts or hid in shadowed corridors, unwilling to face what they had seen. The crimson warning still pulsed on every screen. Do not engage. It was no longer a line of text, but the heartbeat of the fortress, pulsing through walls, consoles, and minds alike. Every flicker of the lights, every hum of the generators seemed to whisper the same command. The generals, who once carried themselves with invincible authority, now looked like cornered beasts. Pride had become a mask, cracking with each moment the woman moved deeper into their stronghold. They had armies, weapons, fleets in orbit, yet none of it mattered. Power meant nothing when even machines seemed to falter in her presence. The fortress was not collapsing from outside assault, it was rotting from within. She entered the central command deck without resistance. The guards assigned to stop her simply stepped aside, weapons lowered, eyes averted. Some dropped their rifles entirely, unwilling to stand in her way. She walked past them as if they were shadows, her footsteps measured and steady. The generals shouted, demanded their men hold the line, but their voices sounded hollow, desperate echoes against the silence that surrounded her. One general, still clinging to defiance, slammed a hand onto the firing controls for the orbital defense batteries. The massive cannons outside the fortress began to rotate, targeting the human ship docked at the edge of the station. For a heartbeat, the chamber filled with relief. At last, overwhelming firepower would crush her arrogance. But as the cannons locked into place, their barrels overloaded. Sparks erupted. Systems shut down in cascading failure. Entire batteries went offline before a single shot was fired. The general's face drained of color. No human hand had touched the controls, yet the fortress itself had betrayed them. She said nothing, did nothing, only watched. Her silence was heavier than threats, heavier than weapons. The soldiers saw it not as weakness, but inevitability. The fortress no longer belonged to its masters. It belonged to her. The generals attempted one last show of unity, gathering information, presenting themselves as if their collective authority could outweigh the fear gnawing at the walls. They demanded she state her purpose. They demanded to know what she wanted. She regarded them with the same stillness that had carried her through their fortress, and when she finally spoke, her words cut deeper than any weapon. She told them she was not here to conquer, not here to negotiate, not here to plead. She was here as a reminder of what humanity was, of what their archives had tried to bury, of why the words "do not engage" had been written into their history. Her voice did not rise, yet the chamber quaked with the weight of it. She explained that humans had never needed vast fleets to shake empires. One was enough. One determined, unrelenting human could break armies, topple regimes, collapse fortresses that had stood for centuries. She told them they had mocked fragility, but fragility was only the surface of something they could never understand: adaptability, ferocity, creativity in the face of annihilation. Where others feared death, humans had learned to wield it. A general, trembling but unwilling to surrender pride, drew his sidearm and aimed it at her. He demanded silence, demanded submission. In the moment he pulled the trigger, the weapon jammed. Not a sound, not a shot. His hand shook, and for the first time he understood the truth. This was not a battle he could win. She stepped forward and with effortless motion disarmed him, setting the useless weapon at his feet, as though returning a child's toy. Panic spread through the war chamber. Some generals shouted for retreat, others for immediate execution, but no one moved. Their words were meaningless. Their armies no longer listened. Their fortress no longer obeyed. Their power had crumbled, and in its place stood only the woman they had mocked hours earlier, the one history had marked in red. One general, older than the rest, dropped his staff of command and stepped forward. His voice shook as he asked the question none of the others dared. "Who are you?" She answered without hesitation. She told him she was Baba Yaga. Not a name chosen, but a name given, forced upon her kind by those who had learned too late what it meant to face them. She said the warning was not hers but theirs, carved into records by survivors who had begged their descendants never to repeat the mistake. She told them they had ignored the wisdom of their ancestors, and now they stood on the edge of the same ruin. The chamber fell silent. Even the machinery seemed to hold its breath. She moved past the circle of generals, and for the first time, none tried to stop her. Some lowered their heads, some turned away, some trembled with the weight of realizing that the empire they served had been exposed as nothing before her presence. Systems across the fortress began to fail. Power grids dimmed. Weapon systems collapsed. Doors sealed shut without command. It was as though the entire structure was bowing to her will. Soldiers abandoned positions in waves. Some fled in shuttles, others locked themselves in quarters, unwilling to face her. The gate, once the symbol of galactic dominance, was no longer a fortress, but a tomb of arrogance. The last general left standing, trembling yet defiant, demanded to know why she had spared them. If she was truly the monster of legend, why had she not slaughtered them all? Her answer was colder than death. She told him killing was unnecessary. Fear was stronger than death, and memory sharper than annihilation. If she killed them, the lesson might be forgotten. But by sparing them, she ensured they would carry the story, that every soldier, every citizen, every species in the coalition would hear what had happened at the gate. That humanity was not to be mocked, not to be underestimated, not to be engaged. She returned to her ship, without another word. The path cleared before her, soldiers lowering weapons, generals frozen in silence, the crimson warning still echoing across every console. As she stepped aboard, the vessel powered to life. No longer the battered relic they had mocked, but a predator cloaked in shadow, revealing hidden systems they had not seen. The ship detached from the dock and slipped into the void, leaving the fortress broken behind. Silence lingered long after she was gone. Then whispers began to spread. Whispers became reports. Reports became transmissions. Across the galaxy, fleets and councils received the same chilling message. Baba Yaga had walked through the gate, and the fortress had fallen without a battle. Do not engage was no longer an archival warning. It was law. The generals, once proud rulers of the choke point of the Orion Arm, sat in the ruins of their command. Their fleets still orbited above, their weapons still gleamed, yet all of it meant nothing. They knew that if she returned, if humanity chose to act, no fortress, no empire, no coalition would stand. The gate had been humbled, and with it, the illusion of invincibility shattered.